Beverly Hills, California. June 20th, 1947. Benjamin Siegal is relaxing in the living room of his girlfriend Virginia Hill's Linden Drive mansion with his friend Alan Smiley. Ben and Virginia had a toxic relationship, and after the pair's latest argument, she hopped on a plane and headed to Europe. Ben was used to conflict. He spent most of his 41 years working his way up through the New York underworld, from muscle to management, leaving a dozen or more bodies in his wake. He was now representing the mob on the West Coast. He was the biggest gangster in LA, and his new ventures in Las Vegas were going to make him one of the most powerful men in America. He was reading the evening edition of the LA Times, unaware of the man in the bushes outside. But the man in the bushes had his eye on Ben through the scope of his high-powered carbine. The man slows his breathing, steadies his aim, and... Hey, you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. Today, we're going to be talking about two men who were instrumental in the creation of modern organized crime. Benjamin Bugsy Siegal and Meyer Lansky. Bug and Meyer. The story of one of these men cannot be told without telling the story of the other. So we got a 2-for-1, an extra long video for the holidays to show my appreciation to all of you guys. All right. I wanted to tell you some stories and talk about some events that are not told in any books or movies about these guys. But first, we got business. If you're new here to the channel and you like what we're doing over here at A Few Bad Men, you want to join the gang, first thing you got to do is you got to go out and you got to find that subscribe button and you got to bump him off. Next thing you got to do is you got to break that thumb. Third thing you got to do is ring that bell and set it for all notifications so you don't miss nothing. Okay? If you want to slide a little envelope upstairs to the boss to keep the channel running smooth, the link is down below. Also, if you want the uncut versions of some of these videos and you want to get them a little early, you got to subscribe to the Few Bad Men Patreon channel. I left the link down there below for you. All right, so let's get into this. Meyer Lansky was born in Grodno on the border of Poland and Russia to Max and Yetta Lansky in 1902. His actual birth date is not known, but 4th of July is the date given to him at Ellis Island, and it's his official birth date on his immigration papers. The name Meyer means bringer of light, and Jewish families often name their firstborn son Meyer in hopes that they will become rabbis. Meyer's family was of the middle class, and his grandfather Benjamin was a businessman with some standing in the community. Meyer, along with his brother Jacob and his parents, lived in a house with his grandparents. As a kid, Meyer's grandfather taught him about Jewish history and took him to Hebrew school. But Wagner was not a safe place for Jews around the time Meyer was born. Anti-Semitism laws were adopted, and Jews lost the right to buy land outside of the city, attend universities, and from changing their names from Jewish names to non-Jewish names. Abuse against Jews was encouraged by the czars, and as a youth, Meyer's uncle was in the path of some drunk Cossacks and got his arm removed by a saber. Meyer's grandfather would often speak of the Promised Land. And at the turn of the century, to a lot of Eastern European Jews, America looked like that Promised Land. Max, Meyer's father, came across first, and after saving for 2 years, he sent for his family. After 2 weeks of seasickness, Meyer reached Ellis Island on April 8th, 1911. Max had a home waiting for them at 33 Chester Avenue in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Brownsville at that time was not much different from Grodno. It was a mostly Jewish neighborhood, and most of the people spoke Yiddish and did not work on the Sabbath. 10-year-old Meyer was placed in PS 84. The schools of New York at that time made no exception for the thousands of newly immigrated children who did not speak the language. They were all placed in the first grade, regardless of age. Meyer did well in school. He was an A student with a few B pluses, and would skip 2 grades per year, and by the time he was 14, he was in the 6th grade. He would go all the way to the 8th grade before he left school. In 1912, the family moved to 894 Rockaway Avenue in Brooklyn. Back then, it was a rural area, and cows grazed the field not far from Meyer's home. By 1914, the family's fortunes had turned, and Max moved his family to 546 Grand Street, a 5-story on the Lower East Side, a major step down from the rural Brownsville. The tenement was hot in the summer and cold in the winter, and the crowded streets teemed with all manner of criminal, old and young. The Lower East Side was nothing like Grodno. This was the time of Dopey Benny Fine, Johnny Spanish, Nathan Kid Dropper Kaplan, and Little Augie Organ, Chick Tricker, Jack Sirocco, and the 5 Points Gang. Meyer's building was around the corner from a strip of brothels, where young Jewish women sat in their chairs on the sidewalk, openly advertising their services. Gambling joints and studs houses were everywhere, and no pocket was safe. Many of the Jewish gangsters that would help form the nationwide crime syndicate were just bad little boys running these streets. Men like Waxi Gordon, Louis Lepke, Cora Shapiro, and Long East Willman. Meyer didn't start his life off like the rest of these men. When Meyer got to the Lower East Side, one of the first things he did was get a library card at the local library. But he wasn't immune to the Lower East Side, and it would be another vice that would snare him. Meyer would often be a spectator at the many crap games that popped up in the neighborhood, and he would watch over the shoulders of the shooters. He learned the game and how to calculate the odds in his head. One Friday, the temptation became too strong for him. As the oldest child, Meyer's mother entrusted him with taking the Sabbath stew to the baker to warm for the Sabbath meal. She would give him a nickel to give to the baker, the price he charged for space in his oven, and the family would pick it up the next day when they returned from temple. Meyer's trip to the baker took him past Delancey Street, and it was on Delancey Street Meyer would place his first bet. 10 minutes later, he returned home with a cold and undelivered pot of stew. His mother was distraught, and young Meyer was embarrassed, and over the next few nights, he wondered what happened. He had all the odds right, and he still lost. Meyer would study the games, and he noticed that the ones running the games were the only winners. Outsiders would be allowed to win small, and once their confidence was up, they would bet big and lose everything. It was a scam. A few weeks later on the Sabbath, Meyer came back to the game, stew in hand, and right before the roller rolled, he placed his bet. The banker gave him a dirty look, but it was too late. Meyer walked to the baker and gave him the pot of stew and a nickel, and walked home with a nickel still in his pocket. He began to frequent these crap games, winning small but not bringing too much attention to himself, and he would never use his mother's money again. On the streets, he was known as Benny Eggs, but because of his slight frame, he was better known as Lil Meyer. He was at a craps game when a fight broke out between two rivals over territory. In a commotion, a pistol fell out of a pocket. Meyer noticed the pistol, as did a kid a few years younger than him, but already bigger than him. The kid tried to get his hands on the gun. Meyer heard the police whistles and grabbed the kid's arm and pulled him away. A few blocks later, the kid asked Meyer, "Why did you do that? I needed that gun." The kid then introduced himself as Ben. The man who would be known to the world as Benjamin Bugsy Siegal was born Barris Siegal on February 28, 1906 in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, to Max and Jeannie Siegal. Williamsburg was right over the bridge from the Lower East Side, and as a kid, Ben made his way over the bridge and fell in love with the fast life of the streets. Soon he dropped out of elementary school and began living in the streets of the Lower East Side. He was part of a gang of kids that robbed pushcarts, rolled drunks, and robbed lofts. At 12, he was the youngest in a group of kids who stuck up a loan company office. He ran for blocks, carrying bags of change before the guards chasing him ran out of breath. Young Ben had no problem with violence. Even as a kid, he enjoyed hurting people. Benny was always the first one through the door on any job, and the first one to shoot his gun at the first signs of danger. His fast temper and irrational behavior caused his friends to say that he was crazy as a bedbug, or Bugsy. The name Bugsy never sat well with Ben. No one who knew him called him that to his face. Any stranger who called him that would get a cold look and an even colder response. My friends call me Ben. You can call me Mr. Siegal. Ben was a childhood friend of Alphonse Capone and reportedly hid the young Capone out at his aunt's house while Al was waiting to go to Chicago after shooting a man. Ben's motto in life was, live fast, die young, and leave a handsome corpse. In 1920, Prohibition became the law of the land. Meyer still had one foot in the legitimate life. He was working as an apprentice in a dye cast shop. Meyer became very good at fixing cars and even better at removing and replacing VIN numbers on stolen cars. Stolen cars would come into the shop, and the next day they would have new VIN numbers and superficial alterations that made it impossible to tell that they were stolen. While Meyer had one foot in, Ben had both feet knee-deep in the streets. He was running with a gang of kids who were hiring themselves out to be enforcers. Ben would break a man's arm for $2 and kill him for 50. Meyer had an Italian pal named Charlie Lucky. The two had met years before on the Lower East Side. Charlie was a couple years older and a few inches taller than Meyer. Charlie had married the streets a long time ago. He tried to extort young Meyer for protection money, and Meyer told him that he should go home and make love to himself. Charlie liked the little Jewish kid's toughness, and the two became friends. Charlie was already making money in the liquor business, and Meyer thought he should do the same. He put together a gang of tough Jewish kids, starting with Ben. The mob included Doc Stacker, Mo Sedway, Abraham Red Levine, Longies Willman and his brother, and Meyer's younger brother Jake. And the group had a close relationship with Lepke and Gura Shapiro. They hired themselves out to bootleggers to protect booze shipments from hijackers. Sometimes they were the hijackers, stealing booze from bootleggers not smart enough to hire them to protect their shipments. They worked security at numerous speakeasies and loaned their stable of killers out to other gangsters. With some of the money they earned, the gang opened a garage on Cannon Street. Here they would store the fleet of trucks they used to deliver booze. The garage was also a front for the stolen car theft ring that they operated. Ben would steal the cars, and Meyer would work his magic. Sometimes he would tinker with the engine, making the cars faster. At $15 a day, they soon became the go-to rental spot for criminals looking for some fast wheels for a job. Sometimes you even got a driver with your rental. Ben Siegal had become known as one of the best getaway drivers in the city. On October 24, 1924, a man named Joseph Marks, known as Kid Porchester, a member of Kid Dropper's gang. Now, I know I said in the Little Augie video that he was a member of the Little Augie gang, but I got some new info that said he was actually a member of the late Kid Dropper gang. He was standing in front of 88 Essex Street when a taxi rolled up and shots rang out. 5 shots missed Porchester and the taxi peeled off. But his sense of relief was brief. The taxi circled the block and shots rang out again. This time, 4 bullets found their way into Kid Porchester. He died on the scene. Ben was arrested after he was found driving a taxi used in the shooting. The baby-faced gangster convinced the police that he was just an innocent driver taken advantage of by men with guns who ordered him to drive. So like I said, Kid Porchester was a dropper man, and Ben and Meyer were close to Lepke and Gura, who were the main enforcers for Little Augie. And I would also bet my money that it was Ben who was the driver when Lepke and Gura killed Little Augie a few years later in 1927. But no, we could debate that. It was around this time that Arnold Rothstein, who was always on the lookout for tough Jews, took an interest in Bug and Meyer. Arnold was on his way out of the alcohol business, and he just wanted to be a wholesaler. He would use his network to bring in the booze, but others would do the dirty work. Charlie Lucky, along with the Bug and Meyer Mob, became those others. In addition, they became some of the first men to move dope for Rothstein. They would use the cover of the taxi service to move product around New York. Rothstein schooled the young gangsters and turned them from street thugs to illegal businessmen. He taught Meyer and the others the best way to operate the bootleg business, the drug business, the labor racketeering, and gambling. Working for Rothstein was like finishing school for gangsters, and these 3 went on to become his star pupils. By the late 20s, Bug and Meyer were some of the biggest gangsters in New York. They wore $300 suits, snap brim hats, and overcoats with velvet lapels. Ben gave his occupation as a cab driver, but he lived in a suite in the Waldorf Astoria, a few floors down from Charlie Lucky. The Bug and Meyer gang were not limited to booze, drugs, and gambling. They were also fur thieves. The fur theft business was another big money maker at the time, and Legs Diamond and Pretty Amberg also ran fur theft rings before they fell out. In January 1928, Jake Lansky came up with a plan to steal furs from the Bronx Fur Dressing Company. Jake Barrett, the man who taught Meyer Lansky the tool and die trade, was in on the robbery. The job was pulled off perfectly, but when they checked the merchandise, some of the furs were missing. All fingers pointed to Barrett. A sit-down was arranged, and Lepke was chosen to be the judge. It didn't take long for Barrett to confess. He said, "It ain't fair. We take all the risks, and Meyer gets most of the gravy. There needs to be a better split on jobs like this." Ben owed Barrett $2,500 from a previous deal, and that was probably the real reason Barrett held back. Ben said, "Bullshit." He said, "We all took chances. You just don't have any balls." Lepke made his decision, and it was decided that Barrett would return the furs. On January 30th, 1928, Barrett was attending a bris for some gangster's kid. I don't know, but it was on Long Island, and the whole gang was there. After the festivities, Meyer offered Barrett a ride back to the Lower East Side. Ben was at the wheel. Meyer, Joseph Benzoli, and Red Levine got in the back, forcing Barrett to sit up front next to Ben. Near Queens Boulevard and 39th Street in Astoria, Barrett felt something against the back of his head. When he went to brush it away, his hand felt the barrel of a sawed-off shotgun. Then he heard Meyer say, "Give him the other one." And then shots rang out. Red Levine shot Barrett in the head, but it only grazed him. Barrett jumped from the car, and Red leaned out the window and fired twice more, but Barrett was in the wind, and Ben peeled off. Barrett made his way to his father's house on Grand Street before going to Gouverneur Hospital and making a statement to the police. And Meyer, Benzoli, and Red Levine were arrested and charged with the shooting. But on March 8th, while on the stand, Barrett refused to identify the 3 as the shooters. They were released, and Barrett would go on to be a member in good standing in the gang. Ben was a good-looking guy, and he had a way with the ladies. Or should I say, he had his way with the ladies. Ben was another one of these serial sexual assaulters like Frank the Dasher Abendando and Happy Mayon of Murder Incorporated. Ben would take what he wanted from young women. On April 12th, in 1928, in Philadelphia, one of these women reported him to the police. Ben would be arrested for sexual assault and have his mugshot taken for the first time. The woman would change her story after being visited by Meyer and the boys. With the death of Arnold Rothstein in 1928, Louis Lepke, Longy's Woman, Meyer Lansky, Ben Siegal, Gora Shapiro, and Charlie Lucky were seen as the big six of organized crime in the U.S. The proof of their influence came in 1929 when they took part in an Atlantic City conference hosted by Enoch Nucky Johnson. The meeting included some of the biggest names in crime. One of those was Al Capone from Chicago. They were meeting to organize crime across America. This was the first push for a national crime syndicate. After this conference, Al Capone was driven to Philadelphia, but he missed his train in Chicago. He decided to take in a movie while he waited for the next train. As he and his bodyguard left the theater, they were approached by police, and he was found with a pistol and arrested. He sat in the Philadelphia prison cell for a year. It was a convenient vacation from the hot streets of Chicago after the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Meyer used the conference to honeymoon with his new wife, Anna. Ben also got married in 1928 to his childhood sweetheart, Esther Krakow. He moved from the Waldorf and bought a mansion in Scarsboro. Anyone who gets caught red-handed for murder is a sucker, in my opinion. Those are the words Danny Ahern wrote in his book, How to Commit a Murder and Get Away with It. Sleek Danny Ahern was a small-time gangster, and he was nephew of Tammany leader Edward J. Ahern. He was also involved in illegal business. He wrote in his book that he was once interrogated by the police. They thought he was lying, and a cop kicked him in the stomach and threw him across the room. After several hours of this type of interrogation, he was taken in front of a judge. Still sore from his questioning, he could not rise when the judge came in. The judge asked, "Why don't you stand up straight when you address the court?" "I can't, Your Honor." "Why not?" "I fell down some steps." Later, when asked why he didn't tell the truth, he looked shocked and said, "Squeal on the cops? They'd never trust me again. I gotta do business with those fellas." By 1928, he was somehow connected with the Bug and Meyer Mob. One night, he witnessed an argument between Ben and Meyer. While Ben was yelling, Meyer sat with his head down, smiling. It was at this time Danny felt it was a good time to earn some points with Lil Meyer. He jumped up and slapped Benny across the face and told him to shut up. Ben's face turned red with anger. He bit his lip and stormed out. Without a word, Meyer gave Danny a side-eyed look, shook his head and walked out. A few days later, Danny was sitting in a parked car on Broome Street, talking to a friend, when a car pulled alongside and shots rang out. Ben leaned out the car firing, hitting Danny twice in the neck and the cheek. Danny would survive, but he kept his mouth shut. He would be shot again on September 15th, 1929 in Cleveland after trying to muscle in on local craps games. Again, he would survive and go on to write his book about his underworld life. 1931 was the year it led. You had the Castellammarese War between the Italians. In Brownsville, you had Abe Rellis and his boys going against the Shapiro brothers. Dutch had the Mad Mick, Vince Cole gunning for him, and the Bug and Meyer Mob were in a war with Waxi Gordon. I did a video on Waxi, but it got removed. I have to do another one soon, so don't worry. Waxi was a veteran of the Lower East Side. He was a few years older than Meyer and his peers, and Waxi was one of the first to get a loan from Arnold Rothstein to start bootlegging. Waxi bought beer factories in Pennsylvania and New Jersey that had switched to making near beer after Prohibition became law. Waxi refitted these buildings to make real beer as well as near beer, and a system of pipes would take the real stuff to a nearby building, and it was shipped from there. By the late 1920s, Bug and Meyer were handling the shipments. Waxi had a falling out with the Bug and Meyer gang in 1927. Waxi hired another group of thugs to escort a shipment of booze to Joe the Boss. When Bug and Meyer got wind of this, they ambushed the convoy. During the holdup, one of the men made a move and shots rang out. The Bug and Meyer gang opened fire, killing 3 and wounding 4. One of the men recognized Lansky and told Waxi. He was furious. From then on, the two had beef. It got physical one night at a club and the two had to be separated. With Prohibition on its way out, dope looked like the next big thing to get into. The streets were flooded thanks to Arnold Rothstein's drug network. This meant a lot more competition. Abe Wagner and his brother Alki Al Wagner were bootleggers who got into the dope game. The brothers started dealing on the Lower East Side, and soon they started stepping on the toes of the Bug and Meyer Mob. On October 7th, 1930, Abe Wagner was arrested during the raid in an apartment at 126th Street, and the police seized $500 of dope, 25 pistols, a .38 caliber pen gun, 2 machine guns, and tons of ammo. At 1:30 a.m. on February 20th, 1931, Abe Wagner was driving past 65 Suffolk Street when shots rang out. Abe's car was peppered with buckshot from 2 automatic shotguns. Abe was able to escape out of the passenger side door and run off. The next day, a man named John Aces Mazza, a Wagner man, and his pal, Fred Koski, went to Mill Frank's cafeteria at 17 First Avenue. The two went in looking for someone. When they didn't find who they were looking for, they turned and left. As they walked out, two other men stepped onto the curb and shots rang out. One bullet crashed through the plate glass window of the cafeteria. 3 more slugs made it into Aces, and one got Koski in the chest. An innocent bystander named Peter Ruffalo was seriously wounded in the head and neck. Ace's Mazda didn't go out without a fight, though. Even though he was injured, he was able to get off 4 shots from a .45 that was found underneath his body. In his possession, Aces had a picture of his girlfriend, a medal with the inscription, "I'll spend my heaven doing good on earth," and 5 cents in his pocket. Later that night, the Wagner brothers hosted a sit-down at the dingy Hatfield House Hotel at 115 29th Street. Abe, his brother Alky Al, and a man named Harry Brown sat across from Ben Siegal, Charlie the Bug Workman, and another unknown gangster. The sit-down lasted for several hours. At 7 a.m., Ben and his party left the hotel. But an hour later, they were back. They kicked the door in the hotel room and shots rang out. Alky Al caught lead in the chest and forehead, dying instantly. Harry Brown was wounded in the side, and Charlie the Bug Workman was shot in the shoulder from return fire. Abe Wagner was lucky. He would survive. He was in the bathroom when the door was kicked in. Harry Brown was taken to the hospital, and he had to be placed under police protection after an ambulance arrived. The men said that they were hired to move Harry to another hospital. When the police checked with the family, they found that they had made no such requests. When the cops went to speak to the men, the ambulance and its drivers were gone. Abe would leave town with his wife and children and head to Minneapolis to lay low. He changed his name to Abe Lord and started a trucking company. But the Bug and Meyer Mob's tentacles stretched beyond the Lower East Side. Once Abe's location was discovered, word was sent to 2 Bug and Meyer members who were in St. Paul hiding out for a murder: Joseph Schaefer and George Young. Saturday evening, July 23rd, 1932, Abe was walking down the street with his pal named Al Gordon. Suddenly, a car pulled up and shots rang out. Schaefer and Young hopped off the running boards of the moving car and dropped Gordon immediately. Abe took off running while the duo gave chase shooting. Most of the bullets missed, smashing shop windows and ricocheting off buildings, but a couple hit Abe. He stumbled wounded into a restaurant, but Schaefer and Young were not the type to leave a job half done. They followed Abe into the restaurant, and with no bullets left, they began to pistol whip Abe to death with their guns in front of shop patrons. Their thoroughness cost them, because they were caught red-handed by the police and taken to jail. They would eventually be found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. On November 10th, 1932, the police received a noise complaint from the manager of the hotel, Franconia, at 20 West 72nd Street, a hotel formerly owned by Ahern Rothstein. When the cops showed up, they arrested 9 men and held them for breaking a new vagrancy law that prohibited known criminals from being in each other's presence. The men were taken to the Essex Street police station and had their pictures taken. The men were Louis Kravitz, Jacob Gura Shapiro, Philip Farvo Kovalik, Hyman Curly Holtz, Joseph Rosen, Benjamin Siegal, Harry Teitelbaum, Harry Big Greenie Greenberg, and Louis Lepke Buckhalter, or Buckhouse as he was known to the police. They were caught in the middle of quote-unquote negotiating with a garment union. In April, the charges against all the men were dropped, except for Hyman Curly Hertz, Louis Lepke, and Gura Shapiro, who was to be deported. After the charges were dropped against Ben, he had his image removed from the records, as was his right. So someone cut out his picture in the official record, but someone else saved the negative, and that's why we have this picture right here. When Charlie Lucky became the first among equals in Cosa Nostra, he named Meyer as his concierge, or counselor. Charlie was on his tour around the country to meet with all the major bosses, and on April 18, 1932, Charlie and Meyer made their way to Chicago. They were noticed by Lieutenant Kelly and Sergeant Walschultz of Chicago PD, and they trailed the gangsters. The police followed them to a nightclub and then to their hotel. The police said Charlie made over 30 phone calls where they overheard him talking about things like Detroit and ships and trucking routes. On April 20th, Charlie and Meyer were headed to the train station. When the cops rushed in, guns drawn, they arrested Charlie and Meyer along with Paul Ricca, Harry Brown, Sylvester Engolia, and John Senna. They were questioned, and Charlie and Meyer gave their profession as gamblers. After a night in jail, they were released and escorted to the train station and told not to return. In May of 1932, Ben Siegal was arrested in Philadelphia after a 19-year-old lady of the evening named Catherine Sanders was arrested. She told the police that Ben and a guy named Jesse Marks were the leaders of a vice ring. She admitted that Marks had taken her to Atlantic City for immoral purposes, violating the Mann Act. Ben was acquitted but was found guilty in state court. Marks stayed on the run until he surrendered in November and was found guilty of white slavery. In August of 1932, a member named Harry Buckbinder was killed in front of the Bug and Meyer garage by Anthony Boccia. Boccia went into hiding in Newark, New Jersey, His whereabouts were found out, and he was visited by Ben Siegal, along with Abe Rellis and Pep Strauss. After the hit squad busted into the hotel room, Anthony was forced to make a phone call to his brother Vincent, telling him to come to New Jersey as quick as he could. After the call, Ben, Abe, and Pep tied Anthony up Murder Inc. style and kicked him and stomped him until he was dead. Then they waited for his brother. When Vincent Vacchi arrived with his partner, Andrew Fabrizio, the pair were forced into the apartment and they suffered the same fate. The next day, the body of Anthony Baccia was found in Long Branch, New Jersey, and the bodies of Vincent Baccia and Andrew Fabrizio were found in Harrison, New Jersey, by a man feeding the birds behind his home. Ben was arrested, but the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. On November 10, 1932, Ben was in his Grant Street headquarters with several other members, including Red Levine and Harry Big Greenie Greenberg. They were in the middle of a card game when someone lowered a bomb down the chimney, and boom, the room lit up. Bodies, furniture, bricks, and glass went flying. Ben was blown out of his clothes and hit in the head with a chunk of concrete and was taken to Gouverneur Hospital with a fractured skull. The bombers meant to finish the job, and the ambulance was followed to the hospital. A few hard-faced men came to visit the unconscious Siegal, but were turned away. Ben's friends came in, dressed him, and took him to another hospital. Anthony Tony the Wop Fabrizio, the brother of Andrew Fabrizio, was suspected of the bombing. On November 21st, 1932, Tony wasn't hiding at his parents' home. He was in the middle of writing his tell-all book about the mob when men knocked at the door claiming to be the police. Tony went into the hallway with the cops, and shots rang out. Tony was shot 3 times in the chest and died instantly. For men in the line of work that Ben and Meyer were in, not only did they have to worry about gangsters and cops, they had to worry about cops who acted like gangsters. In January 1933, a kidnapping ring was exposed when 2 Brooklyn patrolmen, a Brooklyn gangster and several Prohibition agents based in Philadelphia, were arrested after it came out that they were kidnapping gangsters and holding them for ransom. Several bootleggers and gamblers were snatched and paid up to $10,000 for their release. One of these victims was the toughest man in Brooklyn, John Spider Murtha. Ben and Meyer were lucky the ring was exposed when it was, because on one of the prisoners was a list of future targets, and Ben and Meyer's names were on that list. In April of 1933, liquor became legal again, and Waxi Gordon was looking to go legit. Even though there was animosity, the Bug and Meyer gang was still the best in the business at protecting shipments, and it was better to work with them than to have them hijack his shipments. So a business relationship was maintained. But with Prohibition repealed, Waxi and his partners were looking to sell beer legally, and legal booze didn't need protecting. So Waxi informed the Bug and Meyer Mob that their services were no longer required. This didn't sit well with the Bug and Meyer Mob. A sit-down was arranged at the Cartier Hotel in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Waxi had leased the entire floor and had been living there for some time now. Around 4:30 p.m., Max Greenberg and Max Hassel, 2 of Waxi's partners, arrived and went up to the suite. Waiting for them were Ben Siegal and 2 other torpedoes. 15 minutes into the meeting, Waxi went across the hall to make a phone call. Back in the room, the conversation got heated and shots rang out. Max Greenberg was shot in the head and the chest. Max Hassel tried to run, but was shot before he reached the door. Waxi survived and went into hiding. Not only was he hiding from the Bug and Meyer Mob, but he knew that Thomas Dewey was about to charge him with tax evasion. Since they couldn't get their hands on Waxi, Meyer decided to help Dewey. Jake Lansky began to feed Dewey information about Waxi's business. 2 weeks later, Waxi would have a warrant issued for his arrest. He would be caught in upstate New York and sentenced to 30 years in prison. On the afternoon of May 26, 1933, Ben received an urgent phone call, and he and Farvel Cohen hopped into Ben's bulletproof Buick and headed to Broadway and 34th Street. They only made it a few blocks before a car pulled alongside and shots rang out. A machine gun raked the side of the car. Ben hit the gas and the souped-up machine roared up the street. His assailants made a right and got away. Ben crashed the car into the pillar of the 3rd Avenue L, and they got out. Ben said, in any other car, we'd have been corners. Good thing it's bulletproof. Then Farvel said, it ain't bulletproof, Ben. I'm hit. What do you mean you're hit? I mean, I got a slug in the ass. Ben got Farvel to a Brooklyn doctor who specialized in these kinds of matters and got him patched up. Upon further inspection, Ben found 4 more bullet holes in the so-called bulletproof car. The police and the press had no idea what was really going on, and they assumed that this was a war between Dutch Schultz and Waxi Gordon. But in reality, the Cold War between Waxi Gordon and the Bug and Meyer Mob had turned hot. Bug and Meyer teamed up with Lepke's team of killers and the Brownsville Boys and set out to eliminate Waxi and his whole mob. On June 3rd, 1933, the well-dressed corpse of Abe Durst was found in an abandoned car in the Bronx. His face was slashed from ear to mouth, and he had been shot several times and his skull had been crushed. Abe and Waxi went all the way back to their pickpocketing days, and Abe was selling Waxi's beer in the Catskills. Later that day in Passaic, New Jersey, Charles the Duke Brady was standing in front of his building when a sedan rolled past and shots rang out. A Thompson submachine gun roared, and Charlie the Duke dropped to the sidewalk dead from lead exposure. His pal Angelo Alba was also hit twice in the arm, and several bystanders narrowly escaped being hit. 2 days later, Big Bill Oppenheim, a 350-pound hood, was climbing the 7 steps in front of his apartment building, and shots rang out. 2 men opened up on a hefty gangster, hitting him in the side of the head and the body. He dropped to the ground, hitting his head on the step and fractured his skull. 4 days later, a waxy man named Gus Berger was hiding out in a dingy apartment at 138 Clinton Avenue in Newark, New Jersey. He was a killer in his own rights and had been imported from Texas by Waxy as a gunman. He was joined in the apartment by his sister and a child that may or may not have been hers. See, Berger had been arrested back in '29 for kidnapping. Berger had no plans of going out like Abe Durst, Bill Oppenheim, or Duke Brady. All night he sat at the window with a pistol in his hands and extra shells in his pajama pockets. He had a pair of binoculars that he was using to keep an eye on the Riviera Hotel across the street. As the sun began to rise, Berger's eyes began to lower. Exhausted, he flopped on the bed next to the baby with his pistol under the pillow. A little while later, came a loud bang at the door. Berger's sister yelled that no one was home. When the door came crashing down, Berger jumped from the bed and rushed to the door, pistol ready. 2 men burst in and a shootout ensued. Altogether, 12 bullets were fired. Berger caught one in the shoulder and retreated to the bathroom and locked the door. The 2 men tried to break down the door but eventually fled. The police arrived and found Berger's sister and the baby crying in a pool of blood outside the bathroom. Berger told his sister, "Don't worry about me. I'm from Texas." On June 18th, the bullet-riddled body of Charles K.O. Elkins, Waxy's man in Boston, was found in a gutter in Boston, Massachusetts. The next day, on June 19th in Jersey City, another Waxy man named Isidore Schloss was found with 3 slugs in his head by Joseph Cervelli in Marlboro, New Jersey. Waxy men were dropping like bricks into the ocean. The next day, 3 more of his men would meet a bloody end. Henry Gordon walked across the street from his home at 1312 Manor Avenue in the Bronx when he was accosted by 2 men who dragged him into the middle of the street. A car pulled up and shots rang out. 3 slugs penetrated Godel and he expired on the street. That same day, Meyer Jacobs was driving his car down Broadway when a car pulled alongside and shots rang out. Jacobs was hit twice in the head. He lost control of his car and slammed into a line of parked cars before coming to a stop. In Avondale, New Jersey, a man only identified as a Waxy man was found bound by rope, beaten, stabbed, shot in the chest, and thrown from a moving vehicle. On June 30th, Murray Marks was getting off of a bus at Pelham Parkway South and White Plains Road in the Bronx. Witnesses said a man was waiting at the bus stop for a while, and when the bus pulled up, Marks got off, and shots rang out. The shooter pumped 4 slugs into Marks in front of hundreds of witnesses. Marks dropped to the ground dead, and the killer escaped. With Waxy going to jail, and by some sources, 10 to 12 of his soldiers going after only a month, the Jew War came to an abrupt end. It's pretty well known that a lot of these guys, including Charlie Lucky, used opium in their youth. And what do they say about birds of a feather? Well, Ben and Meyer both smoked opium too. In the early 30s, Meyer's wife gave birth to a son that was physically disabled. Anna Lansky was a very religious woman, and she blamed his son's ailments on Meyer's lifestyle. Meyer sunk into a depression and soon graduated from opium smoker to full-blown H addict. This was not good for Meyer. In the business he was in, you had to be sharp, and Meyer's addiction could be seen as a weakness by his associates. So one day in the spring of 1933, Meyer got up, got dressed, got into his car, and headed to a cabin in Massachusetts the gang used for hiding out when things got hot. Meyer went through the cramps, sweats, and vomiting that goes along with going cold turkey. A few days in, he was joined by Jimmy Blue Eyes Allo. Jimmy Blue Eyes was a Charlie Lucky man, and him and Meyer had been friends for years. Jimmy stayed with Meyer for 2 weeks until he felt good enough to return to New York and get back to business. By 1936, Thomas Dewey's war on the mob had already taken down Waxi Gordon, run Oni Madden out of town, and harassed Dutch Schultz to the point he threatened his life, and those threats got him killed by the mob. Dewey was now taking aim at Meyer's pal, Charlie Lucky, on a trumped-up prostitution charge. Although, as boss, Charlie profited from the women who worked the night, he was not directly involved. A jury would find Charlie guilty and sentence him to prison for 30 years. The rats started to flee the ship. Many of the big-time gangsters started to leave New York. Another pal of Charlie Meyer and Ben's, Frank Costello, headed to New Orleans, where he struck an agreement to run high-class casinos. These were another invention of Arnold Rothstein. These places were not the hole-in-the-wall gambling joints in New York. They were classy joints. They catered to people with money, people who were used to the best things, and these corporate joints supplied that. Meyer left and went to build casinos in Cleveland and Miami. He also began to build relationships with Cuban politicians. And Ben headed to LA. He had been going there with Esther and his 2 daughters for vacations for years now. He noticed that the West Coast was ripe for the taking. The biggest gangster in LA at that time was a guy named Jack Dragner. Jack Dragner was born in 1891 and he moved to LA in 1910 from Corleone, Sicily. Dragner was related to Tommy Three Fingers Brown Lucchese, who at this time was the underboss in the Gagliano family, now known as the Lucchese family. Ben noticed that LA was not being exploited for all that it was worth. So Jack Dragner was placed under Ben by the big wigs in New York, and he set out to fleece the joint. Back in Europe, the persecution of Jews had gotten worse in the 20 or so years that Meyer had been in the States. The U.S. had a large German population, and some of those people agreed with the Nazis. So in New York, in the mid-30s, groups like the Brown Shirts, the Silver Shirts, the German American Bund, and the Friends of New Germany were formed. They organized marches and rallies promoting Nazi ideology. Meyer and his boys were well aware of how the Nazis were treating Jews in Germany. But the Jews who grew up in Williamsburg and the Lower East Side were not the old country Jews. They were Americanized, and they understood that a blackjack to the skull or a broken arm spoke louder than any racist with a bullhorn. Meyer got together some of the toughest Jews he knew, and he knew most of the tough Jews in the country. And they began to disrupt some of these gatherings. They worked alongside Nazi activists, and even Walter Winchell, the gossip columnist, helped out. He once called Meyer and let him know there was a pro-Nazi rally that was going to take place in Yorkville, a mostly German neighborhood in Manhattan. Meyer gathered the boys, and we can only imagine all the Jewish toughs he had access to. Guys like Ben Siegal, Harry Greenberg, Charlie the Bug Workman, the boys from Brownsville, Abe, Pep, and Bugsy. One person who I'm sure was first in line was the very religious Red Levine. This guy wore a yarmulke under his fedora and would not kill on the Sabbath, if he could help it. When they showed up, the stage was decorated with swastikas and a picture of the leader of the Nazi party. There were hundreds of brown shirts. Meyer, the boys, and the activists spread themselves throughout the crowd. One of the activists lit a string of firecrackers and threw them on the stage. That was the signal to start the attack. Meyer and his boys went to work on the Nazis with blackjacks and sawed-off pool sticks wrapped in newspaper. Meyer and his band of 15 or so sent the anti-Semites scattering. When it was over, the place was littered with broken Nazis in their bloody brown shirts. Harry Big Greenie Greenberg was born in Galicia. By 1910, his family made their way to the U.S. and settled on the Lower East Side. He quickly became friends with Lepke, Gora, and the Bug and Meyer Mob. In 1923, he was sent to Sing Sing for robbery. And because he never became a citizen, he was deported. He was out on bail while he appealed his deportation. When the decision was upheld, Big Greenie jumped bail and continued to work his muscle for Lepke. When Thomas Dewey started putting pressure on Lepke, it was decided that anyone who could be a witness for Dewey who wasn't in the inner circle had to be eliminated. While Lepke was in hiding, Big Harry ran the day-to-day. But when Dewey subpoenaed him, Lepke decided it would be best if Big Harry went on a lam. He headed across the border to Montreal. By the spring of 1939, Big Harry was running out of dough. He sent a letter to Lepke saying, "I hope you guys are not forgetting me. You better not be." To Lepke and the rest of the pals, this seemed like a threat, and Lepke gave the green light to bump off his old pal. Ali Tic-Tac Tannenbaum was sent to Montreal to deal with Big Greenie Greenberg. But Greenie had played this game for a long time, and he was not stupid. He was already in Detroit when Ali got there. A few weeks later, Harry Big Greenie Greenberg rented a house at 1804 North Vista Del Mar Avenue in Hollywood, California. Ben was back in New York, and Abe Rellis took him to see Lepke in his hideout. Lepke let him know that Harry was in his neck of the woods, and Ben said that he would handle it himself. On the night of November 22nd, 1939, the night before Thanksgiving, Big Harry told his wife he was going to get a newspaper and he'd be right back. When he returned, he pulled up in front of his apartment, put his car in park, but before he could get out, shots rang out. Frankie Carbo walked up and fired 4 times, hitting Big Greenie Greenberg in the shoulder and the head twice each. At such close range, they left burn marks on his body. Frankie jumped back into the stolen car with Ben and took off, followed by Ali Tic-Tac Tannenbaum and Ben's own brand new Buick. The murder would remain unsolved until Ali Tic-Tac Tannenbaum and Abe Rellis began singing to the Brooklyn DA. Ben was arrested and sat in the LA cell while he waited for his trial. Jail life for a guy like Ben was cake. He bribed the guards to let him have all the luxuries he was used to. He had his meals brought in from the finest restaurants in LA, and he could meet with visitors whenever he wanted, male and female. And when his cramped cell became too stifling, Ben would be allowed out for a night on the town. Rellis and Tannenbaum were flown to L.A. to tell a grand jury what they knew about the hit on Big Greenie Greenberg. But lucky for Ben, the case went out the window at a Half Moon Hotel with Abe Rellis. The charges against Ben were dropped, and he would be free to run L.A. And that's where I got to leave off today. All right, I hope you guys learned some things that you didn't know before about the Bug and Meyer gang. All right, make sure you bump off that subscribe button, break that thumb, and ring that bell and set it for all notifications so you don't miss part 2, where I talk about L.A., Las Vegas, Virginia Hill, Meyer and Cuba, and all of that good stuff. All right, so before I leave, I want to wish all the Few Bad Men members Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, whatever it is you celebrate. I hope that you have a great time and enjoy yourself with your family and your friends. All right? So, this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wood nickels. I see you in the funnies.